Hey folks, Steve here, and talking "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" It's "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" question mark. And I'm really interested in the whole idea of how this is adaptation and how we read this as adaptation. And I just want to start by speaking to Linda Hutcheon. That's Hutcheon. And Linda Hutcheon wrote a great book called The Theory of Adaptation. And to conclude the book, The Theory of Adaptation, she asks the question in a subheading, what is not an adaptation? Now, she doesn't really answer the question, but she kind of does. She says basically an adaptation is determined by two central aspects. Aspect one is the adapter has to be engaging and reading and understanding and contextualizing the work as adaptation in some form or another. Right. Secondly, the audience has to be along with this. The audience has to believe that what they're watching, what they're engaging with, is adaptation. Right. So it's both the production process and the kind of the reception of the work. And the question that I'm putting to you, right from the start is, how is "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" adaptation? And do we actually go with the directors who said, well, we didn't read the source, and we're just sort of basing the source on kind of a cultural memory and other films that have sort of been working, the adaptation into their films. Now, I'll just put it out there. The Coen brothers, you don't really want to buy a car from the Coen brothers because, well, firstly, they're not car salesmen. So, why are you buying a car from the Coen brothers anyway? But they're kind of full of it, I think, because I actually think they're really engaging with this as adaptation. So much so that, here's the title, based upon the Odyssey by Homer. So it's not like they're making a film that's loosely based on the Odyssey by Homer and not referencing it, which, often happens, right? Now, remember, Homer's Odyssey is in the public domain. Right, it's in the public domain, so anyone can have access to it. Anyone can have access to adapting it, and also there's no legal issue if you didn't cite this as a source of adaptation. So the Coen brothers want you to be reading this as adaptation. They want you to be thinking about Homer's Odyssey when you're watching the film. Yet, why are they actually removing themselves from that? It's a bit peculiar, but it's typical. It's typical shenanigans from the Coen brothers, who like to play around with adaptation and the whole idea of adaptation. Now, I'm interested in the reading. Margaret Toscana, whose reading is the reading for this week, critical reading, entitled Homer Meets the Coen Brothers, Memory as Artistic Pastiche in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" Now, she says this about the Coens and also the film, and also, essentially the film as a form of adaptation. She says, the Coens humorously remake both Homer and the American folk tradition in a way that protects any of the originals from over-reference. They keep putting new mustaches on the past, thus creating an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present, the ideal and the mundane, to keep us questioning what is good and real, but always indirectly through humour, so that we hardly realise the questions have been asked. This kind of satiric technique suggests that the Coens' mockery may indicate neither a lack of compassion nor ethics, as their critics have accused, but rather it may show a resistance of self-righteous moral systems or art institutions that can no longer examine their own assumptions. End quote. Now, I think what Margaret's banging on about there is I mean, firstly, a lot of people criticize the Coen brothers as being kind of just satirizing things and being actually quite shallow and not going into deeper places. And she's actually saying that there is a depth at work there, but the difference between, say, the Coen brothers and, you know, I don't know, another contemporary like a Quentin Tarantino or something, is that the Coens are really making you work for that meaning. They are really engaging with things in a deep, profound way. They're just not kind of giving it to you, you know, easily. And they're really interested in playing around with, you know, older histories, older narratives, and firstly finding some humor in that, but also finding, you know, deeper questions of meaning, you know, in those works. And a real question of, you know, this film and discussing this film is, you know, humor and what actually happens when you humorize a text that, of course, wasn't, you know, originally meant to be considered as humor. Even though I would say there's quite a lot of fun in the Odyssey. Okay, now straight into Leach's modes and illusion, which was, you know, really Margaret references in the title of her thing. But the very title, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" right? The title comes from a scene in a Preston Sturges film called Sullivan's Travels. And you've got the central character of that film, and he's a film producer, and he's decided that he wants to make a real film about like real America, and he wants to sort of do this adaptation based on a book about the Great Depression in the South of America, right? And the book is called "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" So the whole film is he's referencing this book, but before he can make the film, he needs to go and experience the South and experience, you know, the real America, and that's the film. The film never gets made, you know. That's kind of secondary to his own experience of this. But what the Coen brothers are doing is they're taking up that idea and saying, well, what if there was a book called "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" about the Great Depression, set in, you know, the American South in the 1930s. You know, what happens? You know, how do we actually play that out? So it's kind of a rethinking of that film, that scene, you know, what's going on there, and actually playing it out, because the film is about, you know, the Great Depression in the American South. Now, a lot of people don't like the film, you know, because of reasons I've said. You know, they find it shallow and things like that. And Roger Ebert, who I like a lot, well, I did like a lot when he was alive. He's now deceased, but he was a very good critic, but he didn't like the film. A lot of people don't like the film. He gave the film 2.5 out of 4 stars, saying all the scenes in the film were wonderful in their different ways, and yet I left the movie uncertain and unsatisfied. Now, what I really like about Margaret Toscano, her article, Homer Meets the Coen Brothers, is it kind of addresses the criticism that a lot of people have. And an argument I'm kind of making is, do you have to appreciate this film as adaptation to appreciate the film? Because a lot of people who don't like the film that I've spoken to, I say, well, have you kind of read, you know, Homer's Odyssey? And they kind of look at me blankly like, you know, why on earth would I want to do that? Well, why on earth would you not want to do that when Homer's Odyssey is, you know, considered one of the great works in the history of literature? I would say, and you know, it's sort of a must read. So, you know, but I'm not going to get into that argument. But the point I'm trying to make is, you know, does it actually stand on its own as not an adaptation, or does it only work as adaptation? Now, Margaret, again, I'm going to read another quote. which I think is a good one. Second, while the film appears to be a patchwork structure of episodic ruminations formed through a hodgepodge of quotations and cultural parodies, a paradoxical loose unity becomes evident from the way the references, once their intertextuality is contextualized, meld into coherency. The Coens do not make any allusions to other texts without transforming them in some ingenious way. Often this occurs by virtue of a new context that, while substantially altering the effect and meaning of the original reference, is able to somehow retain the reference's historical integrity, more than simple nostalgia, more than mere homage, which, with Oh Brother, the Coens use art to question our unthinking reverence for our cultural heritage. Whew, bit heavy. But what she's arguing is that the Coens are actually tapping into a deeper thinking about history, right? And they're trying to say that something like Homer's Odyssey is as relevant to like today, but it's also relevant to every era. And essentially, the story, like the Wizard of Oz story about people trying to find their way home, goes back to the Odyssey. And that's what you really have to understand, right? So when he says, I left the movie uncertain and unsatisfied, what she would actually argue is that he's not actually working hard enough to understand the film. And when you don't kind of like a narrative or a cultural work, artifact, whatever that is, the question, there's always kind of two questions. Question one is it the cultural work's fault? Right, which is easy. It's easy to say, well, that's just this baloney, it's crap, it's terrible, right? The harder question is, well, maybe I'm the problem here. Maybe I'm not actually doing the work to understand what's going on here. And I think the more you work with Oh Brother, the more you think about actually what it's doing with adaptation with history, the more you start to really appreciate what's going on here. Okay, analogy. These are often inspired by or based on adaptations, not literal adaptations, but much of the text seems akin to an earlier work. Now, the film is punctuated with clear parallels to what's going on in the in Homer's Odyssey. Okay, so in the film. He becomes Ulysses Everett McGill. Ulysses being the Roman, I think it's the Roman translation of the central character's name. And Everett, he's sort of referred throughout most of the film as Everett. He longs to get back to his beloved wife Penelope. Now she's Penny in the film. She's played by the always great Holly Hunter. Homer's blind prophet, Tiresias, is the old man at the start of the film who kind of prophesies certain things. And he says things, which is straight out of the Odyssey, which is, he works for no one and he has no name. That is the famous kind of moment. Well, not the famous moment. I mean, the Odyssey is full of famous moments, but it's sort of known. I am a man of no name. Meaning that any name he has is a name that's been given to him. And this has always been, an ongoing issue with sort of cultural heritage and cultural ownership and the way that particular cultures have, sort of dismissed this whole idea of being given titles and statuses and things like that. Okay, another link to the original work, the hero's journey to the underworld, in the Odyssey, he sort of goes to the underworld. Now, in Oh Brother, Way Out There, this underworld becomes like fire and brimstone, literally, in the meeting of the Ku Klux Klan, which is all there. So it's kind of like the Coens thinking, well, in the American South, in this period, what is the underworld? Well, the underworld is the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. So that it's all there. So it's like, you look at the film and you might think, well, it's sort of getting away from Homer's Odyssey. Don't remember any Ku Klux Klan members in the Odyssey, but when you actually really think about it and think about what is going on and certain things are being represented. Yeah. Another link, the idea of humans turned into animals appear in the Odyssey, because several men are turned into pigs, right? And in Oh Brother, I mean, I don't know, I'm not going to give a plot spoiler, but let's just say that one of the characters is, sort of, he sort of transforms, let's say. Well, maybe some characters think that he transforms. I'm not going to sort of ruin the moment for you, but I'm just putting it out there that there is a transformation with a particular animal and a particular character, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter. I'm going to move on before I do a plot spoiler. Delma warns him not to go after the treasure, and in the book, one of his former crew warns him of dangers to come. Now, look, there are websites devoted to the parallels between the plots and this. And I'm not going to go through all of the parallels. One, because, I'll end up sort of doing the whole plot for you here. But let's just say that the Coen brothers are full of shit if they're going to say that they haven't read Homer's Odyssey, right? Because they have. They have to have read Homer's Odyssey. That's all I'm saying. Because there's just so many parallels. Or they have great memory, and because they claim that none of them had read the Homer's Odyssey, right? So not even they obviously hadn't read Homer's Odyssey, the Coen brothers, but they were sort of claiming that, the cast also, apart from Tim Blake Nelson, and Tim Blake Nelson, who he plays Delma in the film, he had actually studied literature at school, so he says that he had read the Odyssey, but everybody else says that they hadn't read the Odyssey. Anyway, I'll put it out there. But just because, a director says something, do you have to believe it? Anyway. Okay, colonization. Colonization is the big one. Firstly, it's comedy. So they've taken, right, Homer's Odyssey, deep, serious Homer's Odyssey, and they turned it into a laugh-out-loud comedy, even though you may not find it funny. Mark Kermode, British film critic, he sort of bases comedies on 6 laughs. Does the film have 6 laughs? If it's got 6 laughs, then it's a successful comedy. Okay, so it's a Coen Brothers comedy, so you can link this back into all the other Coen Brothers comedies. Right? Coen Brothers cast, Holly Hunter, John Goodman, John Turturro, George Clooney. This is the first film that they did with George. They'd go on to do a number of films with him, but it's clearly got the Coen Brothers fingerprints all over it, right? Colonization, they've clearly taken that story and they put it in the American Depression South. The bluegrass music, which is central to the film. Also, something else is the blind station owner in, Brother, that sort of allows them to record. And he records it, so he's blind, and he thinks the musicians black, all right? This is the whole point. So let's move on. And sort of the blind station owner is a bit like Homer himself, a promoter of oral poetry. And I think Margaret's piece actually makes that reference. But the point of the film, right, like the point of Homer and Homer's writing, is that poetry, like music, connects everyone. And in this film, you've got races, and people of different social classes are all coming together to appreciate bluegrass music. Parody and pastiche. Now, you would probably say that this is about parody and pastiche, because I just want to read you another quote from Margaret. Now, I would actually argue that it's not parody or pastiche. Now, and this is the reason, and Margaret said this: On one level, Oh Brother presents itself as a light-hearted frolic made simply for fun, but there is a melancholic and serious thread running throughout. The man of constant sorrow is in constant counterpoint with You Are My Sunshine. We're talking about songs here that appear in the films, ladies and gentlemen. This playful movement between entertainment and social awareness returns us to the two strands of critical interest in cultural memory referenced earlier. Whether we are examining Oh Brother as an example of the way minorities need to reclaim cultural memories to define their own identities, or whether we are enjoying the film as a masterfully funny pastiche, the film allows us to participate in the ongoing remaking of folk histories. Whew. Okay, so essentially what she's saying is it masquerades as this stupid comedy, but it has this deeper, more serious thing going on. And the film isn't just parroting like other scenes or other films or anything like that. It's actually using humour as a way of tapping into something deeper and darker, right? And that's how the film gets its laughs. It doesn't do it by parroting other, other films and other things like that. We're not laughing at the film; we're laughing with the film, and I think that's the big difference of this movie. Okay, final thought. Now, is it a successful film, and is it a successful adaptation? Now, a lot of people like the film, and the film did really well at the box office. It was one of the bigger films for the Coen Brothers, even though George Clooney probably helped that, because George Clooney was a huge, big deal at the time, and they actually held off shooting this film for quite some time because George wasn't available, and then George became available and they shot the film. But a lot of people didn't like the film. Is it a successful film on its own? Is it a successful adaptation? I'm really interested in those two things. Is it both, or is it one or the other? Can it only be one or the other? And I would say if you don't think the film works, you need to really think about how it's adapting, what's it actually doing. Okay, another thing about this film, how much does the source matter? If they've changed so much of the source, how much does it matter? How is this an adaptation, and how is it read as an adaptation? How are we watching this as adaptation? Why start with that title card based upon, Homer's Odyssey? Why do that? If they're actually claiming that it's not really an adaptation at all. Can the unknowing reader understand and appreciate this as adaptation? So if you don't know anything about Homer's Odyssey, you've never read it, have no interest in reading this for this course, shame on you, person. But if you don't, okay, can you still understand and appreciate this as adaptation? Is this film saying to you, this is an adaptation? And to understand it, it is adaptation. And does this film only work as adaptation? Right? All right, I'll leave it there. Oh Brother, we're out now. Looks wonderful. Sounds wonderful. Beautiful bluegrass music all through it. Did I say it looks wonderful? George Clooney looks wonderful. Very attractive, handsome George Clooney. At his handsomest, I would just say. George is at his handsomest. All right, I'll leave it there. Now I've declared my love for George Clooney. And enjoy reading Homer's Odyssey. It's a terrific read, and it's also a terrific film. And I'm just going to leave it there. All right. I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.